I never believed in ghosts. Not really. At least not until we arrived at that lighthouse. It started as a simple assignment. Our YouTube channel had been growing steadily, stories about haunted places, legends, and mysteries. The next location was supposed to be easy. An old abandoned lighthouse perched on the rocky coast of a small fishing village. The kind of place that seemed perfect for eerie footage, some quick interviews with locals, and maybe a few good scares to keep our audience hooked. I was the one who found it. The lighthouse had been decommissioned for more than 40 years. The last keeper disappeared without explanation, and the town never fully recovered from the loss. When we called ahead, the residents were polite but distant. No one wanted to talk about the lighthouse, and the ones who did warned us to stay away. But warnings like that only make you want to see for yourself. We arrived on a cold afternoon. The sky was overcast and a thick fog clung to the cliffs. The lighthouse tower rose tall and weathered, its paint peeled away by decades of wind and salt. It stood like a silent sentinel over the crashing waves, unmoving but somehow watching. The air was heavy when we set up camp nearby. The wind whispered in the cracks of the old stone walls, and the sea kept up its relentless rhythm. We made jokes about ghosts and shadows, trying to shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me like a weight. That first night I was restless. I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I stepped outside, hoping the salty air would clear my head. That's when I saw it. A flicker of light coming from the lighthouse lantern room. I froze. The place was supposed to be completely abandoned. No electricity, no maintenance. The entire town had agreed the light hadn't shone for decades. Yet there it was. A brief flash, like someone was trying to signal. I called the others. They shrugged it off, saying it must be a trick of the fog or a reflection from the moon. But I knew what I saw. The light came from inside the tower. Over the next few hours, we tried to keep the mood light, but none of us could deny the unease creeping in. We set up cameras around the site, hoping to capture the light again. We left a drone running overnight, letting it hover just beyond the cliffs. The next morning, we reviewed the footage. That's when things got strange. The drone's camera, which we had left pointed at the ocean, was slowly turning throughout the night. By dawn, it was aimed directly at the lighthouse's lantern room, and no one on the crew remembered moving it. It wasn't a malfunction. It was deliberate. We began to realize the lighthouse wasn't as empty as we thought. The villagers had whispered about the place for years, about how the light never really died, how it sometimes flickered like a heartbeat, how the last keeper had vanished but not really gone. I wanted to believe it was all superstition. But as I sit here recounting those days, I'm not so sure anymore. There was something watching us, something waiting. And it was beginning to show itself. We decided to explore the lighthouse the next morning. Daylight did little to soothe the creeping unease. The towering structure loomed over us, its windows like dark, empty eyes watching our every move. The front door groaned open with a protest, revealing a spiraling staircase coated in rust and dust. Our footsteps echoed as we ascended, each step stirring decades of forgotten silence. Inside, the air was stale but tinged with something else, something almost metallic, like the scent of old machinery long abandoned. The walls bore faded marks worn by time and weather, and we passed broken lanterns and rusted tools lying discarded. At the top, we reached the lens room. It was strange. Unlike the rest of the lighthouse, this room seemed oddly preserved. The glass lens gleamed free of dust, almost as if it had been polished recently. No cobwebs, no decay, just the cold, bright gleam of the great lens itself. We exchanged uneasy glances. How was this possible? No one had been here in decades. There was no electricity to maintain it, yet it shone with an unnatural clarity. That night, as we gathered around the campfire, the uneasy feeling returned tenfold. Our equipment began acting up. Cameras flickered on and off, batteries drained inexplicably fast. The static hissed in our radios, carrying soft, unintelligible whispers. I was the last to fall asleep. Just before dawn, I was woken by a faint sound. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing somewhere above us in the tower. I scrambled out of my tent, heart hammering, but found no one. The tower was silent again, empty as ever. Yet the feeling remained. Someone or something was moving in the lighthouse with us. We reviewed the footage from the night. The cameras placed around the tower caught shadows moving in ways that made no sense. Too quick, too fluid. One camera placed at the base of the stairs showed a fleeting glimpse of a figure climbing the spiral, but no one was there when we checked. Our bravado began to crack. One of our crew said he heard whispers, voices calling names no one else recognized. Another swore the light in the lens room flickered in time with his heartbeat. I tried to dismiss it all as fatigue and nerves, but deep down I knew something had changed. We were no longer visitors, we were being watched, and the lighthouse was waiting. That night things took a turn we couldn't ignore. We had planned to stay calm, keep documenting, and leave by morning. But as darkness settled, the lighthouse seemed to come alive. Footsteps echoed again, heavier this time, as if someone was pacing just out of sight. Our cameras caught strange movements, shadows shifting without source. The air grew thick, almost suffocating. One of the crew, Mark, insisted he saw a figure standing at the top of the spiral staircase, watching us with empty eyes. When we called out, the figure vanished. We decided to investigate the lens room once more. The door, which we'd left open, was now shut tight. No one had touched it. Inside, the great lens was spinning slowly, casting ghostly beams through the fog outside, even though the lighthouse had no power source. The old machinery hummed softly, an impossible mechanical heartbeat. That's when we heard it, whispering. Low, distant voices growing louder, echoing in our heads. Words that twisted and turned, like the fog itself trying to speak. The cameras we left running in the tower recorded footage none of us remembered filming. On one tape, we saw ourselves sleeping, silent, still unaware. On another, a figure stood staring at the camera for hours, unmoving. But no one on the crew could say who it was. Suddenly, Mark was gone. His sleeping bag was empty, no trace of him anywhere. Panic settled in like a thick fog. We shouted his name, called into the night, but only the crashing waves answered. The lighthouse had taken him. Or maybe it had always been waiting to take someone. As dawn crept in, I sat alone on the cold stones outside, watching the tower. The light flickered once more, and I wondered if it was trying to tell us something, or warn us. After Mark disappeared, everything changed. We all felt it, the weight of silence that pressed down on the lighthouse, heavier than before. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of something unseen, waiting. We tried to stick together, but even in the daylight, the lighthouse felt like a trap. The air was colder, and the walls seemed to close in around us. Then we found it. A small drawer tucked beneath the old keeper's desk in the lens room, locked tight but somehow not bolted. Inside was a worn leather journal yellowed with age. The edges were brittle and the ink faded, but the words were still clear. It belonged to the last keeper, the man who disappeared all those years ago. As I flipped through the pages, his handwriting twisted and jagged, revealing a mind unraveling. He wrote about the lighthouse watching him, how it saw everything, his every move, his every thought. How the light didn't just shine outward but inward, reflecting back memories and fears. "There is no escape," one entry read. "The light is not for ships but for the soul. It sees, it waits, and it takes." His last entries became almost illegible. Scribbled notes about voices whispering through the glass, shadows moving just beyond sight, and how he dreamed in static. Visions of faces trapped behind the lens crying out. I read those words aloud, the silence swallowing them whole. Then something changed in our crew. Tom, usually the calmest among us, started whispering to himself. He stared blankly at the tower, eyes glazed over, repeating phrases from the journal. The light sees all. The light remembers. At night he would stand motionless near the lens room door, humming a tune none of us recognized. We tried talking to him, but he wouldn't respond. It was like he was listening to something only he could hear. We were running out of time. The lighthouse wasn't just a building anymore, it was alive. It was hungry. And it was hungry for us. After Tom's strange behavior began, the atmosphere shifted in ways none of us could have imagined. We tried to leave. We packed up our gear, whispered urgent plans in the fading light. But the lighthouse wasn't done with us. As we reached the foot of the tower, the heavy front door slammed shut behind us, locked tight. We rattled the handle, pounding on the wood, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the lighthouse itself was alive, holding us inside. The fog thickened, swallowing the cliffs and drowning out the distant calls of the sea. Our radios crackled uselessly, dead air filling the silence. Trapped, we had no choice but to climb back inside. The spiral staircase groaned under our weight, but something was different now. The steps seemed endless, twisting beyond reason. The walls pulsed faintly like a heartbeat we could feel but not see. At the top, the lens room waited. The great glass lens spun slowly, casting its eerie glow through the fog. Tom was there, eyes wide and wild, staring into the light. When we called his name, he turned slowly, voice hollow and distant. "It's calling us," he said. "The light. It wants us to see." We didn't understand, but before we could ask more, the temperature dropped sharply. A cold that seeped into our bones. Then the whispers began, soft at first, unintelligible like voices carried on the wind, but growing louder, more urgent. Words we couldn't ignore. Stay, see, join. One by one, we started seeing things, shadows moving just beyond the glass, faces pressed against the lens from the inside, eyes begging for release. I saw my own reflection, twisted and distorted, staring back at me with a smile I didn't recognize. Panic set in. We tried to escape again, but the tower seemed endless, the stairway looping back on itself, trapping us in a maze of stone and light. And then I realized we were not alone. The lighthouse was full of them, the lost keepers, the fishermen, the souls swallowed by the sea and the light. Their eyes watched from the shadows, their voices whispered from the walls, and the light. The light was their prison and their curse. As night fell once more, I understood. The lighthouse wasn't just watching, it was choosing. The more time we spent inside that lighthouse, the more I felt myself slipping away. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs, filling the space with an invisible weight. The cold gnawed at our skin, but it wasn't the cold of the sea breeze. It was something older, something that lived within the stone itself. Tom's behavior grew stranger. He no longer spoke to us, only to the light. He'd sit for hours, eyes locked on the spinning lens, whispering secrets none of us could hear. One evening I found him at the base of the stairs, hands pressed against the wall, murmuring a lullaby so faint I almost thought I imagined it. His voice trembled with a fear I couldn't understand. The rest of us were falling apart too. Sarah started seeing shadows flicker in the corner of her eye, always gone when she looked directly. Mike stopped sleeping, pacing endlessly, muttering about voices calling from beneath the waves. I was trying to hold it all together, but even I couldn't ignore the growing presence around us. It was like the lighthouse was alive, watching, waiting, and worse, it was learning. At times I caught glimpses of figures reflected in the glass lens, silhouettes that weren't ours, faces pale and desperate. I realized something terrifying. The lighthouse wasn't just a building, it was a gateway, a prison, a trap. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered up to the lantern room alone. The lens was glowing softly, casting eerie shapes on the fog outside. That's when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the glass, a woman in an old keeper's uniform, her eyes wide with fear and pleading. I wanted to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She raised a trembling hand, tracing a message on the glass. "Help me." The light flickered and she was gone. I felt it then, the weight of centuries pressing down, the souls trapped inside, desperate for release, and the terrible cost of trying to free them. I wasn't sure who was more prisoner, the souls behind the glass or us trapped in the lighthouse's grasp. The next morning the fog lay heavy, swallowing the cliffs and muffling the world beyond the lighthouse. Inside, the atmosphere had thickened, like a storm brewing unseen. We were running out of options and time. Tom's silence had become unsettling. He wandered the tower like a ghost, eyes glazed, lips moving in silent prayers to the light. Sometimes he'd stop abruptly, staring into corners where nothing was visible to the rest of us. Sarah was convinced the lighthouse was speaking to her. She told me about voices whispering her name, gentle at first, then growing insistent, calling her deeper into the tower. Mike, once our strongest, had started breaking down. His hands shook uncontrollably, and he kept saying, "It's watching. It knows." One evening I was alone in the lantern room when the lens started spinning faster, casting fractured light across the fog. The air thickened, humming with an electric charge. Then the whispers turned into voices, clear, urgent, desperate. "We're trapped. We're lost. Help us." I stumbled back as the lens light cut through the shadows, revealing fleeting faces pressed against the glass, their eyes hollow and pleading. Then the ground beneath me shuddered. The lighthouse groaned like a living beast. Suddenly a hidden door creaked open at the base of the lens. A narrow passage, dark and twisting, descended into the depths. My heart pounded. I didn't want to go down there, but I knew I had to. As I stepped inside, the air grew colder, thicker, like breathing underwater. The passage wound down into a cavern below the cliffs. There I found them, rows of old waterlogged boxes, containment vessels of some kind. Inside each, a flickering shadow trapped between life and death. I saw faces I recognized, men and women from the journal, villagers long lost to the sea, and Mark. He was alive, but barely. His eyes were hollow, his voice a faint echo. "They keep us here," he whispered. "The light, it feeds on us. It's never satisfied." The passage trembled and the voices rose in a haunting chorus, begging for freedom, for release. I had no choice but to turn and run. Back up the stairs, past Tom, past Sarah, who reached for me with trembling hands. "We have to stop it," she said, "or we'll join them." But the lighthouse had other plans. The walls closed in, the light blazed brighter, and I knew. We were trapped in a nightmare with no end. The air grew colder as we gathered at the base of the tower, the fog pressing in like a shroud around the rocky cliffs. Every breath felt heavy, weighed down by the ghosts of the past, the secrets whispered through cracked walls and broken glass. We knew the lighthouse was alive, not just a building, but something ancient and hungry, bound by sorrow and rage. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind. The light is a prison. The light is a curse. We had to find a way to stop it before it claimed us all. Tom, still caught in some trance, led us back to the lens room. His eyes shone with a strange light, distant yet filled with urgency. "This is where it started," he whispered. "The heart of the curse." The great glass lens spun slowly, casting eerie, fractured light over the fog outside. The machinery hummed, a sound both mechanical and alive, like a pulse in the very bones of the tower. Sarah and Mike were trembling, their faces pale as shadows. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the lens. Suddenly the light flickered and the air shifted. A voice echoed in the room, not spoken but felt like a cold hand brushing against your skin. Leave or join us. The glass shimmered, revealing faces pressed against the inside, souls trapped, crying out for help. I reached out, my fingers grazing the cold surface. A jolt shot through me, memories flooding in, visions of the keepers before us lost to the light, their despair, their fear, their endless waiting. We realized then that the light was more than a beacon. It was a living entity feeding on memories, on fear, on life itself. To stop it, we had to understand it. Tom, snapping out of his trance, revealed what he'd learned in the depths below. The lighthouse had once been a place of hope for lost sailors, but a terrible accident had trapped spirits inside its heart. The light became a prison for these souls, twisting their pain into a force that could not be broken. We had to break the cycle. Using the journal, we discovered a ritual, a way to release the souls trapped within. But it came at a terrible cost. One of us would have to stay behind, sacrifice themselves to calm the light and free the others. Fear gripped us. We argued, desperate to find another way. But the lighthouse was impatient. It began to tremble, walls cracking, light blazing brighter, almost blinding. We knew what had to be done. With trembling hands, I volunteered. I had to stop the lighthouse from taking any more lives. As I prepared for the ritual, the others held me close, their faces full of fear and hope. The light swirled around me, cold and bright, alive with the voices of the lost. The ritual began, words spoken from the journal echoing in the cavernous room. The lens spun faster, the light cutting through the fog, piercing the soul. And then silence. The light dimmed, the weight lifted, the faces behind the glass softened, finally free. I felt the presence fade, a final breath escaping the lighthouse. When I opened my eyes, the fog was lifting. The dawn was breaking, the lighthouse was still. But I was not alone. The souls were gone, and the light had stopped watching. The dawn brought a fragile peace, the fog retreating slowly from the cliffs, revealing the battered lighthouse standing silent against the rising sun. We thought it was over, but the silence that filled the tower wasn't the calm of freedom. It was the quiet before a storm. After the ritual, the air felt different, thinner, colder, as if the lighthouse itself was holding its breath. Tom, Sarah, and Mike gathered around me, their faces drawn and weary, but alive. For the first time in days, we spoke without fear creeping into our voices. We told stories of the past, of the lost keepers and the souls we'd freed. But as the sun climbed higher, subtle things began to shift. The lens, once still, gave a faint shimmer like a heartbeat beneath the glass. And in that shimmer I saw something darker, a shadow moving just beyond the edges of light. We brushed it off, tired and desperate to believe the nightmare had ended. But the lighthouse had one last secret. That night, as I lay in the small room at the base of the tower, the temperature plunged. The darkness outside pressed against the window, thick and absolute. And then I heard it, a soft tapping, steady and rhythmic, coming from the lens room above. I rose, heart pounding, and climbed the stairs alone. The lens room was empty, but the light pulsed faintly, casting ghostly patterns on the walls. The tapping continued, echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. Then the lens shattered. Glass exploded outward, sparkling like stars in the dim light. And in the shards, I saw her, the woman from the glass, the first keeper trapped all those years ago. Her eyes met mine, filled with sorrow and warning. She whispered a single word, barely audible. "Remember." And then she was gone. I staggered back, heart racing. The lighthouse wasn't done. The curse wasn't broken. It was merely waiting. Waiting for the next soul, waiting for the light to watch again. As dawn broke over the cliffs, I knew one thing. The lighthouse will always watch, and some lights never truly go out. The morning light crept through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the cold stone floor of the lighthouse. But inside, nothing felt bright or safe. After the lens shattered and the ghostly warning, the atmosphere shifted. Tom, Sarah, and Mike looked at me with the same haunted eyes I felt behind my own skull. We had survived, but something had changed. The lighthouse was still alive, still hungry. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only delayed the inevitable. We searched the tower for answers, desperate to understand what remember meant. In the deepest room beneath the cliffs, we found a hidden chamber, forgotten by time, sealed with rusted iron. Inside, old journals, faded photographs, and relics from the first keepers, men and women who had vanished without a trace. Their stories were all the same. The light had trapped them, consumed them, turned them into shadows, prisoners of its endless vigil. And worse, the ritual hadn't freed them. It had only bound us tighter. A low hum began, growing louder, vibrating through the walls. The lighthouse was awakening. We raced to the lantern room, but the spiral stairs twisted impossibly, trapping us in a maze. One by one, the shadows closed in. Faces twisted in torment reached out, their silent screams filling the air. Tom fell first, his eyes glazed as the light claimed him. Sarah and Mike fought desperately, but the light's pull was too strong. Only I remained, heart pounding, breath ragged. I ran to the lens room where the shattered glass glowed faintly. The woman appeared once more. Her voice was clearer now, filled with sorrow. "You cannot escape. You belong here." The walls closed in. The light enveloped me. My reflection stared back from the broken lens, alive but not me. I was trapped. The lighthouse had claimed another keeper, and the light, forever hungry, would watch again. Outside, the fog swallowed the cliffs once more. The lighthouse stood silent, waiting for its next visitor.